Hi, I'm Robert from Bishop Semi-Cycles here in Victoria and Vancouver. And on this video, we're going to talk a little bit about hub versus mid-drive motors. We're just going to talk a little bit about the differences of how those motors work on your bike and some of the design principles of the companies that choose one versus the other. This is a conversation we have a lot in our shop. So let's talk about what the motor is. Hub motor generally is, the motor is built into one of the wheels. And so the hub motor replaces a traditional bicycle hub with an electric motor. And mid-drive motors are actually integrated into the frame where your bottom bracket is. And your bottom bracket is where your pedal's attached to on your bicycle. And so the mid-drive motor actually replaces that part. And you'll see a mid-drive motor because the frame actually has to be manufactured for the bike. There's lots of different mid-drive motor manufacturers out there, and they're not all created equal, but generally they all function in the same way, which is you must pedal the bicycle to make the motor engage. We find that these bikes tend to be more user-friendly because you don't have to think about another way to control the bike. You can just push the pedals and you just feel really strong. Hub motors are the opposite. Hub motors can engage on their own. And so often the bikes that have those throttles on them or a way to control the bike without pedaling, those are hub motors. People who sell hub drive motors, they're really good at that, and we refer people there. So we only sell mid-drive motors. We do that for a couple of reasons. The first one is mid-drive motors tend to be simpler to maintain for traditional bike shops. The motor is kind of a sealed box that's isolated on its own. And so the idea would be if you ever had an electronic problem with the motor, you would actually replace the motor as one part of the bicycle. The nice part about that is it means everything else on the bicycle is still a regular bike part. So I could go to any bike shop and I could fix a flat tire, I could change my brake pads, I could service the rest of the bike. Most manufacturers will design these bikes for a 15-year lifespan at minimum, and often it's lots more than that, as you know, if you own a bike that's more than 20 years old. The other nice part about most mid-drive motors is you have lots of control over how the motor assists you. So I can get exercise if I want, or I can turn the motor way up and I can get less exercise and get to where I'm going a little bit faster. Hub motors and mid-drive motors are pretty different in how they respond. Most hub motor e-bikes don't have any sort of sensor to know when you started pedaling. And so that motor actually can't engage until your wheel has already started rolling and the wheel sensor can actually come into play. Throttles can be useful for folks who have accessibility issues, maybe can't push the pedals or have severe arthritis or hip movements are an issue. I do think that throttle e-bikes can be right for lots of users. Mid-drive motor e-bikes have something called a torque sensor. And that's a sensor that actually takes a reading every time you push that pedal. And that torque sensor is great because when you're at a stoplight, you're going to push really hard to get started, and that motor is instantly going to understand what you need from it, and it's going to engage right away. Hub drive motors are isolated from the gear. So there are gearing, so that's called a cassette or cogs that are bolted to the outside of a hub drive motor. That motor is behind that. So that motor can only output one amount of force. Mid-drive motors, because they're attached to the pedals, it can actually use the gear range of the bicycle. So you can help the motor help you more by shifting gears. And so you can shift gears when you climb a hill, and so those mid-drive motors are going to really do much better with heavy loads and up steep hills. Hub drive motors tend to be on more inexpensive bicycles. And that's not necessarily because they're inherently cheaper. It's because you can make a cheaper bike that you can put a wheel on. But then when you go to maintain them, everything is such low quality that you actually cannot maintain them in the long run. And so the design life of that product in the back end is actually 3 to 8 years. They expect you to throw it away in 3 to 8 years and buy a new one. So we've just talked lots about different motors, and something I didn't bring up a lot of is batteries. You know, batteries are super important in the sense that there are regulations around batteries. So when you are buying a battery, just because you can make the battery or charger fit does not mean you should. And so it's really important to match the battery properly with the motor and the system. There are a couple different standards out there, and so it's important to understand when you're buying e-bikes what the costs associated with them are sometimes, and sometimes that is that battery manufacturing and testing process. There is an EN standard for electrical bikes, and that covers the batteries as well. So every bike we sell meets the EN standard. In the US, there is something called the UL, and the UL standard is a different testing laboratory. So in many US jurisdictions, that is starting to be required, and oftentimes that stuff comes into Canada as well. I think that's it for this video. We're gonna wrap this one up. We will talk little bits more about batteries and motors in some of these other videos and some of the regulations, but this was just a high-level overview of those different types of motors and why we sell what we sell.